Sammy Davis Jr. had been on The Tonight Show more than any other entertainer in history. 137 appearances over 22 years. He had sung, he had danced, he had made Johnny Carson laugh until tears streamed down his face. But on the night of February 14th, 1984, Sammy Davis Jr. walked into NBC Studios in Burbank with something he had never brought before. The producer noticed it first. Sammy always arrived exactly 30 minutes before taping, always with an entourage, always with energy that could light up the entire building. But tonight, he came alone. No manager, no assistant, no one. He walked through the back entrance at 4:47 p.m., wearing a simple black suit, his famous glass eye catching the fluorescent lights of the hallway. He asked to see Johnny before the show. This never happened. In 22 years, Sammy had never once asked to see Johnny before a taping. Their friendship existed on camera and at parties, at Frank's house and Dean's club. But private conversations, those were rare. Those meant something was wrong. Johnny was in his dressing room reviewing note cards when the knock came. His assistant opened the door, and there stood Sammy Davis Jr., 5'4" of pure talent, looking smaller than Johnny had ever seen him. "Sammy, you're early. Everything okay?" Sammy didn't answer. He walked into the dressing room, closed the door behind him, and stood there for a long moment, just looking at Johnny. His one good eye was red. He had been crying. "Johnny, I need to tell you something before we go on tonight." Johnny set down his cards. In 30 years of television, he had developed an instinct for moments like this. He knew when someone was about to break. He knew when the performance was about to end and the person was about to begin. "Sit down, Sammy. Talk to me." Sammy shook his head. "If I sit down, I won't be able to get back up. Just let me stand. Let me say this while I still can." Johnny waited. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere down the hall, Doc Severinson's band was warming up, trumpet notes floating through the concrete walls. "I'm dying, Johnny." The words landed like a punch to the stomach. Johnny's face went pale. "What are you talking about? Dying how?" "Throat cancer. The doctors found it 3 weeks ago. They say I've got maybe 2 years if the treatment works. Maybe less if it doesn't." Johnny stood up from his chair. His hands were shaking. "Sammy, my God, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you—" "Because I needed to tell you in person. Because there's something else I need to say, and I've been waiting 22 years to say it. And if I'm running out of time, then I'm not going to waste another minute." The studio audience that night had no idea what was coming. They filed into their seats expecting entertainment, expecting Sammy's famous impressions, expecting the song and dance routines that had made him a legend. They got their tickets through the usual lottery, waited in the usual line, felt the usual excitement of seeing Johnny Carson live. None of them knew they were about to witness something that would never be broadcast, something the network would lock away in a vault, something that only 300 people would ever see with their own eyes. The show began normally. Johnny's monologue was sharp. Jokes about Reagan, about Valentine's Day, about the Los Angeles traffic. Ed McMahon laughed in all the right places. The audience responded perfectly. Everything was running like clockwork. Then Ed's voice boomed across the studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the legendary Sammy Davis Jr." The band launched into The Candyman. The audience erupted. Sammy emerged from behind the curtain, moving with that famous energy, that explosive charisma that had defined him for 4 decades. He danced toward Johnny's desk, spun twice, pointed at the audience, blew a kiss to a woman in the front row. It was vintage Sammy. Perfect Sammy. The Sammy everyone expected. But Johnny saw something else. Behind the smile, behind the performance, behind 40 years of practice at pretending everything was fine, Johnny saw a man saying goodbye. Sammy sat down in the guest chair. The applause continued for almost a full minute. When it finally faded, Johnny leaned forward. "Sammy, you look fantastic tonight." "I feel fantastic, Johnny. You know me. I'll sleep when I'm dead." The audience laughed. They didn't know how literal that statement was about to become. For 15 minutes, the interview proceeded normally. Sammy told stories about Frank and Dean. He did his famous impressions. He talked about his upcoming tour dates, his new album, his plans for the future. Plans that Johnny now knew would never happen. Then Johnny did something unusual. He pushed aside his note cards, the same gesture he always made when something unscripted was about to happen, and looked at Sammy with an expression the audience couldn't quite read. "Sammy, we've known each other a long time. 22 years, baby. You've been stuck with me for 22 years. In all that time, I don't think I've ever asked you a real question. A question about who you really are underneath all of this." Sammy's smile flickered. Just for a moment, but Johnny caught it. "What do you want to know, Johnny?" "I want to know if you're happy." The question hung in the air like smoke. The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the light entertainment they had signed up for. This felt different. This felt dangerous. Sammy was quiet for a long moment. His hand moved unconsciously to his glass eye, a habit he had developed decades ago whenever he was nervous. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, stripped of performance. "You know, Johnny, people have been asking me that question my whole life. Am I happy? Am I fulfilled? Am I grateful for everything I've achieved? And I always give the same answer. I say yes. I say I'm the luckiest man alive. I say, I've lived a dream. But nobody ever asked the follow-up question. Nobody ever asked what it cost me to live that dream." The audience was completely silent now. Something was shifting. Something was breaking open. "What did it cost you, Sammy?" Sammy looked at Johnny, then at the audience, then at the cameras capturing every moment for the millions watching at home. And then Sammy Davis Jr. did something he had never done in 40 years of performing. He told the truth. "It cost me everything, Johnny. It cost me my dignity. It cost me my self-respect. It cost me the ability to look at myself in the mirror without wondering who was looking back." Johnny's expression didn't change, but his eyes were glistening. "Tell me," Sammy took a breath, "do you know what it was like being the only black man in the Rat Pack? Do you know what that really meant?" "I think I know some of it." "You don't know any of it, Johnny. Nobody does, because I never told anyone the truth." Sammy shifted in his chair, and suddenly he looked older, smaller, like the weight of 4 decades was pressing down on his shoulders. "When we performed in Las Vegas, I couldn't stay in the same hotels as Frank and Dean. They got the penthouse suites. I got a room in a boarding house on the other side of town, the colored side of town. After the show, they'd go gambling in the casino. I'd go out the back door because black people weren't allowed on the casino floor." The audience gasped. Several people covered their mouths. "Frank fought for me. I have to give him that. He told the casino owners that if Sammy couldn't stay, none of us would stay. And eventually, things changed. Eventually, I got my suite. Eventually, I could walk through the front door. But do you know what that did to me, Johnny? Do you know what it does to a man to have his friends fight for his basic humanity while he stands there and smiles and pretends it doesn't hurt?" Johnny couldn't speak. He just listened. "I learned to tap dance when I was 3 years old. Not because I loved it, because my father told me it was the only way a black man could survive in this country. Make them laugh, make them cheer, make them love you so much that they forget to hate you. And I did that, Johnny. For 40 years, I did exactly that. I danced and I sang and I smiled until my face hurt. And every night I went home and wondered if any of them actually saw me, or if they just saw a performing monkey who happened to be talented." The audience was weeping now. Not just a few people. Dozens of them, crying openly in their seats. "Do you know why I converted to Judaism?" Sammy asked suddenly. Johnny shook his head. "Everyone thinks it was because I studied the faith and found meaning in it. That's the story I always told. But you want the truth? The real truth? I want the truth, Sammy. I converted because I thought if I became Jewish, white people might see me as something other than black. I thought if I shared their religion, shared their suffering, shared their history, maybe they would finally accept me as one of them. Maybe they would finally see me as human." Sammy's voice cracked. "Do you understand what I'm saying, Johnny? I was so desperate to be accepted that I adopted an entire religion, hoping it would make people hate me less. That's how broken I was. That's how broken I still am. Johnny's hand moved across the desk and rested on Sammy's arm. The cameras caught the gesture. 300 people watched as two men connected in a moment of raw, unscripted humanity. "You hugged Richard Nixon," Johnny said quietly. "People gave you hell for that." Sammy's laugh was bitter. "People? Johnny, the black community crucified me. They called me a sellout, a traitor, an Uncle Tom. They said I had betrayed my race for a photo opportunity with a president who didn't care about civil rights. Why did you do it? Because he was the president of the United States, and he invited me to the White House. And for one moment, one single moment, I wanted to feel like I belonged. I wanted to stand in that building and know that a black man from Harlem had made it all the way to the most powerful house in the world. I wasn't hugging Nixon. I was hugging the idea that maybe, finally, I was enough." Sammy wiped his eye with the back of his hand. "But I wasn't enough. I'm never enough. No matter how many shows I do, no matter how many albums I sell, no matter how many awards they give me, I wake up every morning feeling like that little kid who wasn't allowed to drink from the same water fountain as white children. I'm 60 years old, Johnny. I've performed for kings and presidents, and I still feel like I'm tap dancing for my life." The silence in that studio was absolute. You could hear the hum of the lights, the quiet weeping of the audience, the sound of history being made. Johnny spoke softly. "Sammy, why are you telling me this now? Why tonight?" Sammy looked at him. That one good eye, the eye that had seen so much pain and joy and everything in between, was filled with tears. "Because I'm running out of time to tell the truth. And because there's something I need to say to you specifically. Something I should have said 22 years ago." "What is it?" Sammy stood up from the guest chair. The audience murmured in confusion. This wasn't part of any script. This wasn't how Tonight Show interviews worked. He walked around Johnny's desk, something guests never did, and stood right next to Johnny's chair. Johnny turned to face him, uncertain what was happening. "Stand up, Johnny." Johnny stood. The two men faced each other, the camera capturing every moment. "I need to tell you something," Sammy said, "and I need to whisper it, because it's not for the audience. It's not for America. It's just for you." Johnny leaned in, tilting his head so Sammy could reach his ear. 300 people held their breath. Millions watching at home leaned closer to their televisions, desperate to hear something they never would. Sammy cupped his hand around Johnny's ear and whispered 6 words. Johnny's reaction was immediate. His body went rigid. His hand gripped the edge of the desk. His eyes squeezed shut, and when they opened, they were flooded with tears. Sammy stepped back, watching Johnny's face, watching the impact of those 6 words land. Johnny couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The king of late night, the man who had filled every silence with a joke for 30 years, stood there completely speechless. The audience didn't understand. They couldn't hear what Sammy had whispered. They only saw Johnny Carson crying, really crying, tears streaming down his face in a way they had never witnessed before. "Sammy," Johnny finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know. All these years, I didn't know." "I know you didn't. That's why I never said anything. But I'm telling you now, because I need you to understand something." Sammy turned to face the audience, to face the cameras, to face America. "What I just told Johnny is something I've never told anyone, a secret I've kept for over 30 years, and I'm not going to share it with all of you because some things are private. Some things belong only to the people they involve." He turned back to Johnny, who was still struggling to compose himself. "But I will tell you this. Johnny Carson is the reason I survived this business. Not Frank, not Dean, not anyone else. Johnny." The audience stirred, confused but captivated. In 1961, I had just lost my eye in a car accident. I had just converted to Judaism. I was at the lowest point of my entire life. The black community hated me for the Nixon thing, even though that hadn't happened yet. They hated me for other things. The white community tolerated me as long as I kept dancing. I had no home, I belonged nowhere. Sammy's voice grew stronger, more passionate. And then Johnny Carson invited me on this show. It was his first year hosting. Nobody knew if the show would last. Nobody knew if Johnny would make it. But he saw something in me. He saw past the performance. He saw the person. Johnny was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. After that first appearance, Johnny took me to dinner. Just the two of us. No cameras, no press, just two men talking. And he asked me a question that no one had ever asked me before. "What question?" someone in the audience called out. Sammy smiled sadly. He asked me how I was really doing, not how the career was going, not how the shows were selling, how I was really doing. And when I tried to give him the usual answer, the tap dance answer, the everything's fine answer, he stopped me. He looked me right in the eye and said, "Sammy, I didn't ask about the performer. I asked about the man." Sammy turned to Johnny. "You saw me, Johnny. You were the first person in my entire life who saw me. Not the entertainer, not the black man, not the convert. Just me. Just Sammy. And that saved my life." Johnny found his voice. It was rough, broken, but it was there. "Sammy, you never told me that. Because I was afraid if I told you how much it meant, you'd stop doing it. I was afraid you'd realize how broken I was and decide I wasn't worth the effort. So I kept it inside. For 22 years, I kept it inside." "And the words you whispered to me?" Sammy nodded slowly. "Those words are about something that happened a long time ago. Something you did for me that you probably don't even remember. But I remember. I've remembered every single day." Johnny shook his head. "I remember, Sammy. I remember everything." The two men looked at each other, and something passed between them that the audience couldn't see but could feel. A connection, a recognition. Two men who had both spent their lives performing finally seeing each other clearly. Sammy reached out and embraced Johnny. It wasn't a Hollywood hug. It wasn't a quick pat on the back. It was a real embrace between two friends who had just shared something profound. The audience rose to their feet. 300 people standing, applauding, crying, witnessing something that would never be broadcast but would never be forgotten by anyone who was there. When they finally separated, Johnny wiped his eyes and looked at the camera. "We're going to take a break," he said, his voice still unsteady. "And when we come back?" He paused, looked at Sammy. "Actually, I don't know what we're going to do when we come back, but it's going to be different." During the commercial break, the producers went crazy. What was happening? What had Sammy whispered? Was Johnny okay? Should they cut to a backup guest? Johnny waved them all away. He and Sammy sat together at the desk, talking quietly, their conversation picked up by no microphones, seen by no cameras. When the show resumed, Johnny made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed was something I've never experienced in 30 years of television. Sammy and I have been friends for a long time, but tonight I learned something about him that I didn't know. Something that changes how I see our friendship, how I see this business, how I see myself." He looked at Sammy. "I'm not going to share what Sammy whispered to me. That's private. But I will share what it made me realize." The audience leaned in. "We spend so much time in this business pretending. Pretending we're happy when we're not. Pretending we're strong when we're breaking. Pretending we don't need anyone when we're dying of loneliness. And someone like Sammy, who has more talent in his little finger than most of us have in our entire bodies, has spent his whole life wondering if he's enough. That's a tragedy. That's a failure. Not his failure. Our failure. Society's failure." Johnny turned to face the camera directly. "If you're watching at home and you have someone in your life who you see, really see, tell them. Don't wait 22 years like we did. Don't wait until time runs out. Tell them now." Sammy spoke up. "And if you're watching and you feel like you're not enough, like you don't belong, like you've been tap dancing your whole life just to survive, I want you to know something. You are enough. You belong. And somewhere out there is someone who sees you, even if you don't know it yet." The show ended differently that night. No final jokes, no light send-off. Just two men sitting together at a desk, the weight of everything they had shared still hanging in the air. Sammy Davis Jr. died on May 16, 1990, 6 years after that interview. The throat cancer that he had revealed to Johnny took everything from him, piece by piece. His voice went first, then his ability to perform, then finally his life. Johnny visited him in the hospital 3 days before he died. They sat together in that sterile room, the machines beeping, the California sun streaming through the window. Sammy could barely speak by then, his voice reduced to a whisper. But he managed 6 words, the same 6 words he had whispered on that Tonight Show stage in 1984. Johnny held his friend's hand and cried, and Sammy smiled, and neither of them needed to say anything else. At Sammy's funeral, Johnny was asked to speak. He stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of celebrities and politicians and regular people who had come to say goodbye. Frank Sinatra was there. Dean Martin was there. Hollywood royalty lined every pew. Johnny spoke for only 2 minutes. Sammy Davis Jr. spent his entire life making people happy. He danced for us. He sang for us. He made us laugh. But most of us never bothered to ask if he was happy. Most of us never bothered to see past the performance to the person. Johnny paused, his voice breaking. 6 years ago, Sammy whispered 6 words in my ear on live television. I'm not going to tell you what those words were. They weren't meant for you. But I'll tell you what they taught me. He looked out at the crowd. They taught me that the most important thing we can do for each other is see each other, really see each other. Not the performance, not the mask, the person underneath. Sammy spent 64 years on this earth wondering if anyone truly saw him. And that's not his tragedy. That's ours. The funeral ended. The crowds dispersed. But those who had been in that Tonight Show audience on February 14th, 1984, never forgot what they witnessed. They told their children. They told their grandchildren. They spoke about the night Sammy Davis Jr. finally stopped performing and started being real. The footage was never broadcast. NBC locked it away, citing concerns about the personal nature of the content. But bootleg recordings circulated for years, passed from hand to hand, copied onto VHS tapes, and later uploaded to the earliest days of the internet. People who watch those recordings always ask the same question. What did Sammy whisper? Johnny never told anyone. He took that secret to his grave when he died in 2005. But those who knew Johnny well, who visited his Malibu home in his final years, noticed something on his nightstand. A framed photograph from 1984. 2 men at a desk, one whispering in the other's ear, both of them about to cry. Written on the back of the frame, in Johnny's handwriting, were 6 words. The same 6 words Sammy had whispered. The words that had broken Johnny open and put him back together. The words that proved sometimes the most powerful thing you can say isn't meant for the world. It's meant for one person. And that's enough. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Share it with someone who needs to know they're seen. Drop a comment about a time when someone's words changed your life. And remember what Sammy Davis Jr. spent his whole life learning. You don't have to dance for anyone's approval. You are already enough. You always have been.